Episode 172 Above Ground Podcast, Recalibrating with Gerrad R. Bohl.
Disclaimer. The hosts of this podcast, Timothy Patrick and Will Foley, are by no means medical professionals. However, having lived experience with mental illness themselves, they have gained useful perspectives on common mental health issues that some of us struggle to overcome on a daily basis. By sharing their stories, they hope to create connection. By creating connection, they hope to help you find your purpose. And through purpose, we can all begin to build the foundation for positive mental health. This is Above Ground Podcast.
Coming at you live with real conversations about mental health from the perspective. It's time for Above Ground Podcast. Now your hosts, TPP and Will Foley.
Hey, what is up, everyone? Welcome to episode 172 of Above Ground Podcast. This is the final episode of our Suicide Prevention Awareness Month for September series, and we are finishing up September, and I just wanted to give a huge shout out to everyone that came out Sunday to the Out of the Darkness Walk for Rita, stopped by the Above Ground Podcast table and saw Tim, saw me on the walk route. Everyone, thank you so much for being there. It was a great event. It was great to see people that I see every year and have come to know and become friends with and learn stories of. Thank you so much. Can't thank you enough. Can't thank the support of enough from the Capital District Psychiatric Center team from Albany, New York. Thank you very much for being there. That was awesome. But it was great. It was a great event. We had a great day. So thank you to everyone who came out. Our next tabling event will be the Upstate Punk Rock Flea Market, which is happening Sunday, October 23rd at Empire Live in downtown Albany from 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. It is being sponsored by Radio X. Artie will be there spinning tunes. I'm not sure if Robbie Smidex will be there spinning tunes, but they'll be there all day spinning tunes, and there's some great vendors. Above Ground Podcast will be there with all the mental health and substance abuse and resources. Also, don't forget Pogo Beard Company, which I'm sure will be next to. They'll be selling their Abomination Tattoo Balm. That's right. I put it on all my tattoos. Go to PogoBeardCompany.com and order some Abomination Tattoo Balm. That's right. Awesome dude. Can't wait to see him again. That's Upstate Punk Rock Flea Market, October 23rd, Above Ground Podcast. Now, episode 172, Above Ground Podcast, Recalibration. Hey, what is up, everyone? Welcome to Above Ground Podcast. Above Ground Podcast.
Because you can't serve below.
That's right. What's up, TPP? Good morning.
Yes, how are you, Will?
Oh, come on, dude. Really?
I'm doing dandy. How are you?
Yeah, I'm smashing, man. I'm
Smashing.
Oh, this morning we are joined by Gerrad Bohl. Is it Gerrad R. Bohl? Is that how you would rather? Is it, or are you good with just Gerrad Bohl?
Oh, Gerrad Bohl's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Gerrad is an author, man. He's an author, an actor, a model. I'm sorry, I brain farted there for a second. Gerrad, it's great to have you, man. I read your bio and I listened to a couple episodes of podcasts that you've been on recently, and this is a mental health podcast, man. So I just want to know where you're at right now in your journey of recovery and everything, and how you're doing.
Thank you. Well, yeah, thanks for having me on the show, first of all. And I guess how I'm doing, well, I'm almost 40. My mental health has taken many turns and twists, I think, as many as people do over the years. And my first challenges, I guess, started when I was really young. I would say 9, 10 years old. And I would have massive anxiety and panic attacks. And then I started having suicidal ideation. And I kind of lived with those conditions pretty frequently. And then as I got older and I sought therapy, group therapy in my late 20s. It's helped tremendously as far as kind of recalibrating my thinking patterns and how I navigate the world. So I'm doing much better these days, definitely much better these days. I noticed that suicidal ideation is a visitor only when I'm under periods of like extreme stress, extreme duress, like huge life-changing situations. Then I can be triggered into those thinking patterns, but far less powerful than they used to be.
Was that, now you say, did you have these thoughts as early as 9, 10 years old? Wow.
Correct. Yeah.
I just wanted to jump in because we talk about suicidal ideation a lot. Mm-hmm. And most people that are surrounded by this understand what it is. Can you sort of give us a little view into your ideation, if that's okay? Just because I think people misunderstand what suicidal ideation is. Mm-hmm. Because I live with it. Tim and I both live with varying degrees of this. So I'm just curious to know what your definition is for you and how that affects you.
Sure. Yeah, exactly like you said, different varying degrees. As I understand it and as I've experienced it, mental illness and suicidal ideation is like a spectrum. So there's varying degrees of severity that I've experienced. As a kid, that, it's for some people, which is kind of why I wrote the book too, it's alarming for people to hear that at such a young age, someone can experience suicidal ideation, because it isn't something first of all, we don't talk about it, which is the problem. But it does happen. And people, I think, assume, or they think, why? Like, how could that even be possible? Like, how could a child be thinking those things? And it definitely is environmentally influenced. They say that children or youth, maybe teens, they have a better chance of not acting on suicidal ideation or suicidal thoughts if there's at least one person who's stable in their life who can provide some sort of support. But if you don't have that single person, the chances of acting on it are far greater. I'd say in my youth, when I was a kid, the only reason I didn't act was because I did have one person who was so loving and caring and tender in my life that it made the pain go away. And there was many life changes that occurred in my I was in my late 20s and my early 30s that got me to thinking about writing this book, to bring a gentle awareness that there are kids out there younger than teens, because there are many resources available for young adults and teens for mental health and suicidal ideation in particular, but not very many for kids, because just people don't want to acknowledge that it exists and that it happens. So I wrote this book to gently shed light on that issue so that it can be an open dialogue. But going back to like the spectrum of what it's like for me, as a kid, I think that there's many different potential causes or pushes behind suicidal ideation as far as the beginnings of it for some people. I think that there are some people who do it because they have guilty actions. So I guess what I was saying is there's different reasons why people might have suicidal ideation, and it's kind of that spectrum is not only in severity, but it's also in causation, right? So if you look at people who are older and they maybe have done something bad in life and they just don't want to deal with it, that's definitely one cause of suicidal ideation and suicidal actions. For me, that's not the stemming issue here. And a lot of times that isn't for kids either. That isn't a thing that kids experience. They haven't done something so bad that they're going to, start thinking those things in general. Usually, and this is what it was for me, is such a lack of acceptance in life around you that it is so uncomfortable to exist. Like, when you're told you're fat, ugly, stupid, poor, less than, whatever it is of your circumstances, and if your surroundings around you are pointing them out or bringing them out or highlighting them or segregating you because of those things, that can start at any age. It doesn't have to be a teenager, and young kids are affected by that. And for me, that's how it began. I was so ostracized as a kid because I was overweight. I was effeminate. I was a little effeminate kid. And the other thing too was we moved around a lot. So my family moved probably in 15 years, we moved 30 sometimes. I can't remember the exact number. So that's on average twice a year. I can't maintain, you don't maintain friendships or relationships. So you don't have any emotional stability around you either when that kind of thing happens. So for me, that was the beginning of it. And the major cause of it was this pain that I don't fit in. I don't belong here. And being gay was just on top of all that, So that's how it started for me. Yeah.
You talk about being uncomfortable, and that's a real big leading cause, because uncomfortability is very hard to deal with for people. Were you an army brat? Is that what caused all the moving, or was it just like instability?
No, well, my dad was in the Navy when I was born, but that was only a couple of years. He was never a full career service person. So once he got out of the service, we still moved around. And this was mostly just due to my parents' youth. They were babies having babies. I think they were 17, 18 when they had me.
Oh yeah, okay. That can explain a lot of things, because I mean, you're not even a full grown person and trying to raise another one.
Exactly. Yeah. And they're in their 50s, and it's nice to see them growing up. And I've kind of grew up with them. They're more like siblings sometimes.
I'm sure. So. Do you have a good relationship with them? Has it developed over the years?
Yeah, it's changed. It's morphed over the years. It's really wonderful now. It was when I was a kid, really, really little, like before 9 years old, like I was 4 or 5. I had a very wonderful childhood. Parents, well, my dad was never really emotional available. He couldn't be, but my mother was, and there was no real issues in the household aside from moving around. But then addiction was introduced into the situation, and as addiction progresses, as it does without being arrested, it just gets worse and worse. And it did until I was 15, and then my parents separated, and then I moved out because it just got so horrendous that I didn't know where my father went. He just disappeared. And then my mom was under the grips of her addiction, unfortunately. And then I felt like she essentially was gone. When addiction takes over, it isn't the person that you know and love. It's the disease, of course. And so they do become someone else entirely. And so I had essentially just cognitively written her off. As sad as that is to say, I just assumed this is never going to be the same. She's never coming back. She's gone. And so I left, and just with the assumption, I need to move on with my life because I can't stay here. It's not safe. But cut to my late 20s, she remarried, got divorced, started cleaning herself up and turning herself around. And I'm one definitely where I don't tell me things are better or different. Show me. Words and actions have to match, and words and actions aren't matching. And so when actions started to match what she was saying, then I was like, okay, I'm comfortable revisiting having a relationship again. And that's been now a 20-year or 15-year reset and reestablishing that relationship. It's been wonderful. And so I'm really lucky to have her. Some people don't get a second chance. They lose their parents or whoever to addiction and they never come back. So I'm very lucky in that way.
Yeah, that's great. And I just want to note on what we were just talking about with the suicidal ideation. I think the way that you communicated it, the way that you put it into words is great. I think a lot of people can relate to that. And on top of that, just to throw in that there's active and passive suicidal ideation. So the active obviously is going to be a little bit more severe in a crisis mode, and where the passive is maybe things would be better, just kind of thoughts that come in and go. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that is it needs to be talked about a lot more, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Especially, and I think too with the youth or the younger ones, it's probably more passive. That dialogue is there, and it's maybe just not coming to the surface as so active as it might in the teens. But as with many things with mental illness or things progress unless they're arrested. And so if teens are acting out on suicidal ideation, it's because probably it's been there for a while and it needs to be discussed. So.
Right. And so often we take that thought even as a child or whatever, and judge it like, oh, I shouldn't be thinking like this. And these are dark, bad thoughts. So I must be a dark, bad person, and we put those on ourselves. So, it just accumulates up, and, it can, the end result could be, terrible.
And, children that, go through the foster care system too, I can imagine bouncing around with that sort of uncertainty and circumstances that are changing constantly. Like ours were changing constantly too. And it's not identical, but I can understand, or at least I can imagine what something like that would feel like and how it could definitely perpetuate those things in those particular groups of kids.
Absolutely. I think that's the perfect word, is uncertainty. I think that is the word. You were, I guess, brought to the mental health side through what you've been through. Is that kind of what I'm gathering? Because you were more of an artist first, and you kind of used writing as, I'm assuming, as like kind of like a distraction therapy type. And then you became more passionate on the advocacy side for mental health. Is that through your own?
Yeah, that would be correct. Yeah, it's correct to say that. Yeah, I've definitely always been active in some sort of art form, as well as saying I've done modeling. I've done lots of acting, theater, some film stuff. I've done dance, classical ballet, Brazilian samba, all kinds of fun things. And writing has always been in the background. It's not something that I've done publicly, but something I've done just for therapeutic. I like to write poems, and I would write like little short stories, but never anything, as huge as a book. And it was interesting how that kind of came about. I had sort of not a midlife crisis, but an early life crisis, and life got different. And one day I was having ice cream with a friend, and I said, I think I'm going to write a book. And she said, what do you mean? What's it going to be about? And I said, I have no idea. I just had this idea that I just know I'm going to write a book. And so I'm going to start doing that.
Yeah. And congratulations on that. We're talking about good Oliver Dooley in the Palace of Keepers. I want to hear about good Oliver Dooley, and where did this come from? Is this character you essentially in a different, morphed? Or is it a character that encompasses you but isn't you?
First, yeah. So I guess first I'll say I wanted to create a space or a world that I wanted to be in. I was like, this is the place. If I could choose to be in a place, I can't choose my parents. I can't choose the world. If I could choose and create a place, this is what it would be like. And good Oliver Dooley represents the highest and best version of myself. Awesome. He's what I would aspire to be. And I can maybe be on a good day, but all the other characters are essences of me. All the other kids that are in there, they are magnified versions of different parts of my personality.
For a fantasy writer, and the way you just explained it about that all the characters in there are different parts of you, is that something that you learned through dance and through acting? Because for me as a musician, every song that I write is a little piece of me, and most of them, they're all autobiographical in one way or another. And I'm just curious to know how your process works as a writer to come up with this fantasy world, as to how you disseminate characters from yourself, because I'm wondering if it's an acting thing.
Oh, I see. Well, it's very layered. I'll say that. The story is very layered and the process is very layered. I really didn't know what I was doing, because I said I just had this idea, like, I'm going to write a book. I've never written a book. I don't know how to structure a story. Like after writing the first 3 chapters, I was like, how do I go forward? Like, I don't even know what to do. So it was literally just a figure it out as I went along process. And I guess the idea for making the characters sort of magnified personalities of myself, I guess there's 2 things I realized when I started writing the book was I didn't actually need to imagine a whole lot, because the world we live in really is spectacularly, incredibly out of this world, amazing. Like the plants and stuff is kind of what I'm referring to. I didn't have to invent a whole lot, because there's so much variety of biodiversity in this world already. I just had to use what we had and blow it up. And so I did the same thing with my personality. I'm like, well, I've had times where I've been really silly, or sassy, or I've been really just different qualities. And I'm like, I'm going to make characters like these kids, kind of just parts of my personality that I've experienced over my life. And I've experienced these personality, characteristics of myself through periods of time that have been months long, years long, and then they kind of fade, and I mature in some way. And so acting has helped, because acting, you're really looking at yourself and a character in a script, or you're building a character based on how you can understand that character. So you can do that through your own filters, of course. So I could say definitely acting definitely helped as far as creating the story overall too, because I also know, I guess, how plot works and how character arches work without really having ever studied it officially in school. I've just done enough of reading and performing to understand that. So.
That's awesome. What is for you, as far as when you are in, say, a down cycle? How is your art affected in your down cycle? Does it become more manic, and do you increase, or does it actually lessen your ability to be artistic and look at it in a different way?
No, I've never really even thought about it, because art gets created no matter what. And I mean, I'll have days if I'm just really tired. Like yesterday, I usually write a lot of my creative stuff on the weekends. And yesterday I didn't do any writing. I just didn't feel like it. And so I don't punish myself, or if that's how I'm feeling, that's how I'm feeling. And I allow myself to feel that, just knowing that tomorrow I can do more. And so today I'll do some writing. But when I'm feeling down, it doesn't necessarily put me off from it. It's more if I'm tired or just kind of needing a rest. And so if I'm feeling down, which I've been feeling down, by the way, for several years, because I'm in Montana and I don't want to be here. And I've been working very hard. It's a very dangerous area to live, actually.
Well, I was going to say, for you, it probably is. And just knowing, the state of the world we live in, I'm sure it's pretty dangerous.
I've had death threats. I've had a gun held to my head. And, growing up, it's crazy.
I got to ask, how did you end up in Montana?
Well, I'm from here originally, so my parents, everyone's here. Yeah, my family's here. Yeah, and ended up back here because of this life change that wasn't. I was in LA modeling, and then I was like doing 7 shoots a week, and then suddenly it just stopped, which happens. I've been modeling a long time, so that happens. But then I had quit my job, and I was like, I got this. This took a turn that I didn't anticipate. I made a mistake. I made a mistake. So what happened was, I was like, I have to refigure out what's going to happen with my life. And so I went back to school. So I came back to Montana, and I lived with my sister for a little while. And that's where one of the incidences of a death threat occurred, which you would think, of all the places, wasn't in a bar, like picking up straight people or something. Like, that's not a thing that some people do that, but it's not what I was doing. And not that merits a death threat, but I mean,
right. No, absolutely not. That's
it's more likely to happen if that happens. But I was at home at my sister's place, and I was in my pajamas watching TV. She wasn't even there. I was staying with her for 6 months while I figured out where I was going to go to school and all this. My brother-in-law's brother came in and just held the gun to my head. And I don't even remember what he said. It just kind of, I just got fogged over.
Sure.
And then he left. He left. So I don't know what happened, really. I've only met him a couple times. But anyway, so that was one of the physical. And then I've had like letters sent to me and things like this.
Were these all, if I can ask, pertaining to your sexuality?
The gun, I can't say for sure. I'm going to say yes, because the hate, I've always grown up with hate in Montana. Like when we lived here, I've always experienced hate. And it was interesting because as a kid, I was like, oh, you hear it'll get better. I was bullied a lot, of course, but never had anything like a gun held to my head when I was younger.
What the hell?
And I figured, okay, it maybe get better. Maybe it will get better. People mature. It's gotten worse than when I was a kid.
There's a lot of reasons why that is.
Yes.
There's a lot of reasons why that is, man. So it's terrible. I'm
trying to get out of here.
I'm going to go buy a copy of your book so I can at least help you try to get the fuck out of there. You know what I mean? That's the least I can do.
You know what?
Take Gerrad the fuck out of Montana, man. Let's bring him back. Let's bring him to the East Coast where he belongs.
That's the title of the episode.
Yeah, get the fuck out of Montana.
So I just wanted to to something that you had mentioned earlier about like, growing up and being maybe overweight or bullied or whatnot. It's just kind of cool, funny, whatever you want to call it, to see like, you were in LA, doing, acting and being a model and all these things. So it's like, it just goes to show, it's a crazy world, but, good for you because you turned it around. You could have went down a different path, and it was like a double middle finger to everybody. Like, hey, now I have a book out too. So good on you.
Yeah, I have a friend who's a really, really close friend who knows my whole personal story. He gives me lots of advice, and I go to him. He's like a mentor, and he said something. He's like, definitely that some people have, and says you have this undying fight in you. He says that is really amazing. He says to see you navigate all these things that happen and you fight, like he says, you just fight back and you keep going. And I'm like, I can't say what is that attribute other than what it was, something I was born with. I think something within people, some kind of spark. I don't know what it is, but I have to say, like, there's a huge empty pit inside of me that is hungry to explore and find out and try new things, which is why I've done so many things, because I'm just always curious, like, what is that like? And what is it like to do this or model, to dance? Like, I'll do tap now, or I've done jazz and I've done mod just because I wanted to see what it was all like. And I just am not afraid to do those things. And I think that that's probably what he's talking about. I think people a lot of times hold themselves back because of fear of maybe failure or exploring. Like, I don't care. Like, I just want to experience whatever this new idea is I have and see where it goes.
That's awesome, man. That's incredible. And I kind of want to combine this because we're peers, and I'm a certified peer support specialist here in New York. And the peer movement itself, the consumer survivor expiation movement, actually started based out of the gay rights movement. And that's kind of where a lot of that started from. When you learn history of the peer movement, people were getting released from mental institutions and things, and they needed to fight. So it's incredible how those two things have fed each other to help perpetuate change, even though change takes for fucking ever, as we know. But
yeah, absolutely. I was kind of something on that note about peers and like mentorship. Something I've noticed about, I studied anthropology before I finished my degree in criminology, and I've always been fascinated with human behavior and its origins. And something I've noticed over time is if you look at different minority groups, Native American Indian, for example, or African American, or gay people, the one thing I noticed that's a little different about homosexuals or maybe trans people especially is that they typically lack someone in their home environment to have that peer, or to have someone as a role model, or someone who they can relate to. Whereas if you're Native American or African American, perhaps not always, of course, as a generalization, but you have a family of the same origin. So if you're gay, sometimes you don't have that. And so you definitely, unless you have gay parents by chance, which is more common now than it was even 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you rely on other people in those communities that you eventually find to kind of re-raise you or mentor you. And I think that's really important aspect to little differences in minorities that I think that people experience.
He mentioned recalibrating earlier. I like that word. So what are some things that you do to recalibrate?
You mean like on a day-to-day basis, or if I'm feeling low?
Yeah. Both, anything, sometimes, when you're feeling low, what you can do to kind of,
we're all about sharing tools. So what are a couple of tools in your bat belt that you use to get yourself out of your cycles, or maybe even just to keep yourself happy when you're happy? Doesn't have to be when you're down. What are some of your tools?
I love water, so showering. Like if I'm in a deep spiral, I'm like, I can't think my way out of this problem. I have to do something physical usually, and so I'll shower and have a reset. I love going to cafes, and I do a lot of my writing in cafes. I know it maybe sounds cliche now, but I've always done that. And so writing can definitely be an escape. Keeps me happy as well to be doing something creative. I love to garden. And so that's another reason I'm in an apartment. So that has been a hindrance on my happiness, because the two happiest moments in my life have been when I have had the ability to garden. And I'm not talking about a flower pot in the windowsill. I'm like talking about major landscaping stuff that I like to do. So that is a beautiful distraction for me. And I have a Great Dane. He's in the bedroom because he's very, very vocal and friendly. So he is a great antidepressant. He's a big goofball that's super sweet. Yeah. So those things all help. And I talk to friends who know if I'm really in a deep, dark space, I have a couple of people I can call and say, okay, I can see it's happening. Just talk to me for a minute. Let's talk about something fun, to get me out of the spiral.
Perfect. That's important for sure.
Is there something specific that usually you sense or feel when you're starting to be triggered? Obviously, major life changes, and I understand, because that's what affects me too. I notice, and everybody, I can't say for everybody, but I know a lot of people that I've spoken to, major life events and changes are a big trigger for people who have certain types of mental illnesses or disorders, or even just anxiety in general. So is there something specific that you start, like, is there a place that you start to feel it first? How do you recognize it?
Yeah. Let's see. Well,
And maybe you can't even, maybe you've never thought about it either. I'm sure you have, just by how in depth you are and how schooled you are in yourself. I'm just wondering if you how you start to recognize it.
Yeah, there's definitely I'd say first is a thought, and then there's a feeling, right? If I'm thinking or ruminating about a problem that I perhaps can't fix and I want to, or it's going to impact me in a negative way, it'll scare me, then I've been ruminating on it. Perhaps I've been thinking about it, like, okay, I can either anticipating a problem that hasn't even happened, which is a problem I have, or there's an actual problem. Both can be tricky, but the one that hasn't happened yet can be really tricky because it's an illusion. And I've convinced myself that it's going to be real. And so I'll start thinking that, or I'll think on it. And the magnitude of the problem will grow because I'm focusing on this problem. And I'm like, oh boy, this could happen, and then this can happen, and then this can happen. And then so those thoughts then therefore initiate a feeling process of, oh gosh, this is not good. I need to, I feel maybe tense, tight in my chest, in my throat. Maybe my breathing will get shallower. I won't be breathing as deeply as I should be normally. The overwhelming sensation, though, that I get is out of control. I feel out of control, and therefore I don't feel safe, and I feel panicky. That's when it starts to really spiral from thought to feeling. Then I feel out of control, and I get panicky, then I get scared. And these are adjectives for human conditions, which are difficult to color with adjectives, but they're close representatives kind of what it feels like. But I have to say, it feels scary. It just feels scary and dooming, like things are about to fail and be bad and horrific, and it's gonna be the end of the world kind of panic feeling. So it escalates.
Excellent. Well said. It's like you as you were talking there, Will and I have talked before about our anchors. And it's like, it reminded me of that when you were talking, because it's like you're suffering over this, point A, and then you're adding more suffering onto these illusions, as you say. It's like you're just putting more and more and more and more on something, and you're adding these anchors of weight, trying to drag along, like, ghosts of Christmas past.
Definitely. And even sometimes just my idea of where I think I should be in life can trigger that cycle.
Of course.
I could have it.
Absolutely.
I did not expect to be in Montana, and I need to be out of here 3 years ago, and it hasn't happened yet. And I'm panicking about it right now because it's not.
Well, you have some legitimate reasons to be panicky. But that kind of opens up another thing. How do you know necessarily what's an illusion versus what's reality? Because for me, myself, when I'm experiencing that, something usually starts that thought, but there's some evidence that those thoughts could really happen. So I'm wondering how you decipher between illusion and the possibility that you might need to actually be proactive about something.
That's definitely what you'd say, doing my part. Like, what is it if I'm in a situation that isn't good? What do I need to do to start putting the ball forward to make a change? If I'm not doing something to move whatever it is that needs to be moved forward, then I'm definitely causing an issue for myself that doesn't need to be. So I need to look at what I'm doing. And in the case I'm in right now, I can't do anything more than what I am doing to get out of here, because I don't want to rent anymore, right? So I'm trying to move to buy. So that's why this is taking longer than probably just, I'm going to move and rent. That's easy, or easier. I'm trying to buy because I'm tired of renting. So that is stalling and delaying the process, but I'm doing every single thing I can and then some, probably even too much, to make that process happen. And the illusion could be something like, if I don't get out of here and buy a house, there's going to be another pandemic and interest rates are going to keep climbing. I'm never going to be able to afford a house. That idea is not actually true, because I don't know that for sure, but I will believe it and I'll run with it, and then I'll panic, and then anxiety will set in because I've convinced myself of this story that could happen. Of course, it absolutely could happen, but I don't have any foreseeing knowledge that will happen, and I'm believing it. And then therefore my emotional state is changing because of that.
More proof of the fact that our thoughts do create our reality. Mm-hmm. I mean, and it's like, but again, I know this. I know this, but I can't always get myself to fucking believe it. And that, but again, it's just more truth that your thoughts really do create your reality, and they can bring about those things that to happen. Mm-hmm. But you still have to navigate the landmines, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't want to cut your thought off.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in those cases, then I'll call someone, those people that I can trust that are real close to me, and tell them what's going on. And then we'll tease out those things that are not real or can't be known, like you can't know, and then I can focus on what I can do, kind of boil it down to the meats and bones, you can say, meat and potatoes of the situation. Like, what can I focus on here to change? And if there's nothing, then I just get to let it go and wait. But anyway.
Perfectly said, man. Perfectly said. I think that's like cognitive distortion 101 right there. Mm-hmm. If you can bring yourself down to baseline and focus on what it is and what you can or you can't do, there's no, if you can't do anything about it, there's no reason to worry or to add suffering onto it, what's already there.
Yeah. And this idea of separating it, like, okay, that's a process of detachment from what's happening, right? That, like you said, well, I can't do that alone sometimes it's too powerful. That's why I need a support network to help me do that. And with kids, like going back to suicidal ideation, that was the whole point in this book, was to teach, or to at least show how it's possible to detach from that voice which intends to do me harm, because it isn't me. It is this manifestation of either circumstances, environment. It's this evil voice that intends to see me suffer and intends to do me harm, and I don't have to believe it. And that for me was empowering when I learned that about suicidal ideation. This is like almost like a villain in a story speaking in the back of my head that it wants to see me suffer and do harm, and I don't have to believe that voice. And so that's what the idea of taking it so that children can kind of understand that, and even adults detaching from that voice that obviously is not you. It's this thing that has culminated as a result of circumstances and events that you can detach from and say, I don't want that. That isn't me. That's something else. And by giving it a name like a villain, it's easier to identify. It's easier to say, like, sure, that's the bad guy.
Right? They say name it to tame it. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I wanted to touch back on your parents again, because you said something interesting about suicidal ideation and stuff, and your parents' addiction themselves. Did they have, obviously being young, okay, and having it causes all kinds of psychological things, but were there issues in either one of them prior that you're aware of, that they had mental health issues?
I mean, now that I'm at where I'm at, and I've talked with them quite a bit, we've talked a lot over the years about our lives. I know now that, yeah, definitely mental illness has always been present, and active addiction has always been present in the lineage of my heritage. It's always been there in varying degrees. And so they were not immune to that. That's for sure.
Okay.
They never brought it up though, then, like in the moment or as a youth, because I don't think they were aware. I don't think they were aware of what was happening,
For where your parents are, they weren't talking about mental illness back then anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one of those, because your parents are around my age, and I can say that, nobody was talking about this stuff 15 years ago. So
yeah, definitely. Even one-on-one psychology therapy has definitely changed. My mom, I remember her telling me that she went to a therapist in her 20s, and it was such a taboo. Even, that's just 30 years ago. So it was like, you're a really, really bad person and sick if you have to do that.
Yeah, there's that stigma. Stigma. And not to mention the self-stigma that we put on ourselves either.
Mm-hmm.
But this is one way we combat that shit. We tell our story and we stand strong, and we say, no, it's not. It's okay to not be okay.
Yeah. In fact, if someone tells me they haven't been to therapy, I'm like, ooh.
Yeah, you might need to reevaluate that situation.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely. I mean, we've talked about it here. I mean, therapy is, it doesn't matter if you, have issues, if you classify as mentally ill or whatever you want to say. I think, everybody can benefit from going to therapy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, therapy is a very, very strong tool, man. But again, we've said this, and I say this all the time, is that therapy is only going to be as good as you're willing to take part in it.
I wanted to know, I read real quick that you are a fan of Tolstoy, so I didn't know if you had a favorite quote.
Well, I mean, Anna Karenina is amazing. And at the very end of the book, I'm going to misquote it. It's so beautiful. I mean, he's such an amazing writer. And first, he's an historian, right? Second, a writer. War and Peace was more like a historical recount of events.
Right.
There was no like plot points like, oh God, this is going on forever. But Anna Karenina, he really was like, I'm going to tell a story here. And the prose is amazing. And at the very end, one of the main characters in the story settles for a peaceful, quiet life instead of wealth and prestige. And he is content with where he has decided to put his mind. And the way that Tolstoy just, colors that is just so beautiful. I can't remember the exact quote now, but
we always finish up every podcast with 3 questions, and let's have some fun.
So do you have a favorite or a least favorite word?
I have lots of favorite words, that's for sure, because they make me giggle, like when I think of them or when I say just to say them. Least favorite words totally caught me off guard on this one. I have to think here for a minute.
It's all right. You can name just your favorite if you want. It doesn't matter. Whatever you want to do.
Sure. I don't know. There's so many words I love. Like I can't even pronounce that one. I'm totally off today with my trains of thought, but I love the word. I can't even say it. Well, as a writer, I can say like there are words that like come up to my mind like automatically just because of use that I'm tired of. I'm like, oh God. And it's the word said. I hate having to write the word said because I have to write it so much.
Yeah, and there's only so many so many variations of it too.
Yeah. I'm like, this is so repetitive. But as a reader, you don't notice it, but as a writer, you do. So there's that. And favorite words? Oh man. I'm totally drawing a blank.
It's all right. Okay.
Yeah.
It's all good, man. So I used to ask people about their animals because I'm a big animal lover and stuff. And I know you're an animal lover. Obviously you have Sir, what's his name? Sir
Louis.
Sir Louis, the Great Dane. But I tend to jazz this question up. I improvise this sometimes when I hear something. So within your journey, what is something that writing this book taught you about yourself that you didn't know?
That I could write a book. That, in fact, I've written the second book, which comes out in September. There's a sequel. And
Awesome.
I've written
Congratulations.
Thank you. I've written a third book now that is not related to these first two. It's a separate story. And I have 4 other books in mind already to write still. So I'm going to be busy for the next several years because I keep getting ideas and I like them. I remember when I was writing the first 2 books, this first one and the sequel, I was thinking, what am I going to do? I'm a writer now and I have to keep writing, but I don't know what I'm going to write about. But now suddenly I've got like 5 other ideas. I think that that's the one thing in the writing process too that has been so helpful, is I don't think about or criticize what I'm writing when I'm writing it, because I first write it by hand and then I go back later and then I edit it and type it all up. So when I'm in the writing process of the first draft that's handwritten, I don't even question why it's happening like this. I just write it down and I just filter. The one filter I have is, does it move the story along? Does this serve the story in some way? If it doesn't, then I don't write it. But if it can be used, I'll write it down and I may not use it later. So I give myself so much freedom to do what I need to do, to just play. And then I don't have to worry about how perfect it's going to be or if it's going to be even useful for the story. I can change that later. So that has allowed so many barriers to come down. And I think that's why I'm not afraid to have these other ideas. Like I have an idea for several other books. I'm like, these are going to be really fun and different. And I'm just going to write them and see what happens. So to give myself that freedom is such a gift that I think so many people deprive themselves, that writing has definitely given me. Acting, dance have kind of done that. But as a dancer, as an actor, you're definitely limited to what you're being given. Like I'm being given a script, I'm being given choreography. But as a writer, microwaves could fly if I want them to, as long as they fit within the context of what's happening, right?
Right.
It doesn't matter. So much more freedom.
That's awesome. So when you started to write Good Oliver Dooley, did you have several characters already in mind? Do you flesh this out, or is it like, oh my God, like I got this idea and you wind up, free writing like 15 pages and you go through it and then you're like, okay, well, I can see another character here, or is it even more organic than that? You just have the first idea and then you just let it branch off.
That was when I hit that 3-chapter mark, when I was like, how do I even do this? That's when I'd figured out how to do this. Like, this is how I think I will do this. Is I decided like I needed to have plot points to write towards. So I would think of things like, well, this could happen in the story. And then I would write towards that destination. And then as I did that, I'd be like, oh, it'd be nice to have another flower thing here, or maybe another person enter the story because there needs to be some comedy element into this piece because it's too heavy. So depending on what I need or what I think I need, I'll add. But as far as planning it out to begin with, no, like I had Good Oliver in mind. And then I had his 2 adoptive parents to start the story. Everything else, there's like over 75 characters in the story. All of those just came to me as I wrote it. I was like, oh, this would be fun. This would be fun. And then, but I did lose track at one point. I had to create a map. I had created a key because I couldn't remember the people I was creating and how they sounded and what they wore and what they did in that one part. I'm like, I don't remember any of this. So I had to create a map for myself to follow. So that was kind of interesting too. But
I think we need to see an animated series about this.
I was just going to say that. I'm like, yo, when Hollywood picks you up, Gerrad, remember us, all right?
Remember Hollywood, get Gerrad the fuck out of Montana and get his new animated series produced.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
That would be cool.
So
an
fun.
Animated series. Yeah, that would be
It
awesome.
would be. Well, that's kind of how I see it too. When I write, I'm writing down kind of what I'm seeing. It's almost like it's playing out like a movie. So I just am like, I'm describing what I'm seeing almost in my head, as it plays out. Yeah. So that's kind of the process.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing that with us. That was cool.
Thank you. I love hearing about the process.
Yeah. And in this third book, for example, that's unrelated to Good Oliver Dooley, is so good elderly is more like middle grade, younger kids, but everyone can enjoy it, of course. This third book I'm writing is more geared towards I'd say like young adults, so teens, so slightly older age demographic, and it isn't as much of a world building story, and there isn't as many characters, so it's a little simpler in that way. But the story itself it's still about like acceptance and not so much about mental health, but definitely like challenges of a youth that's struggling with identity. Therefore, and then there's several instances or events that this person has to go through before they come to the space of acceptance, of course.
The hero's journey.
Yeah. and not a traditional one either. So I'm hoping that it surprises some people. So
awesome.
So the last question is, if there was something that you could do or you would like to see done for mental health as a whole without any kind of restraint, what would it be?
Gosh, there's so many things. I'd say that, it needs to be more important than football. It has to be prioritized. It has to be glorified. It has to be
rewarded. I love that you said that. I literally said those words like last week. Because we're into this like whole sports thing and giving rides to and I'm like, these track meets go until like 9 o'clock at night, and then they have school the next day, and I'm just like, does anybody care? Like, so I don't want to interrupt you, but that was just perfect.
That's exactly, and it's a paradigm shift. You know what I mean? It's a whole cultural shift that would need to occur. Yeah.
It's hard to fight those things when the culture wars rage on by so many loudmouth people that seem to have the bully pulpit all the time. But that's why I do what I do, though.
Yes, exactly.
Fuck them.
That's all we can do, though, right?
Yeah.
And let me just say this, because it's one of my favorites and I off the top of my head, Leo. If you want to change the world, start by changing yourself. He says something along those lines. I believe that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then Mother Teresa, she said that quote, if you want to change the world, go home and love your family, which is what I did, but not by choice. I have to admit, I'm not a saint. And so,
is anybody really?
She's got me one up on that one for sure. But old Teresa.
Yeah, Teresa. You're so silly over there in your sainthood.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time out today and sharing with us.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Thanks for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Yeah, Gerrad, thank you so much, man. You can find Gerrad at Gerrad Bohl. Is it GerradRBohl.com or is it Gerrad
yes.
Bohl? Okay, it's GerradRBohl.com. I'll have all that in the show notes.
I appreciate you guys very much.
Thank you. We appreciate you.
So until next week, Will.
Yeah, Timmy. Until next week, be well.
Be safe.
Be above.
Thank you for giving us a listen. New episodes every Wednesday. If you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can share, rate, review, and even subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. Other ways to support the show: follow us on social media, share the content, share our episodes. You can also buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/abovegroundpod. For further concerns, show ideas, or just to say hi, you can email us at abovegroundpodcast@gmail.com. Once again, thank you for listening and supporting mental health. Keep the conversation going and stay above.